Chapter 1878 Invader. Luozhua raised his hand and held the golden light in the palm of his hand. He looked up and gazed at the distant great snow mountain. The wind and snow suddenly became gusty, and his gaze became flickering. Suddenly, two golden wings sprouted from his back, and the light illuminated the courtyard of Jokhang Temple. Who? His wings spread out, and he soared into the air, like a hurricane, towards the Mount Everest. At this moment, on top of the Mount Everest, 10,000 years of unthawed frost condensed here, enduring the endless baptism of the raging wind. This is the highest peak in the world, and from here you can overlook the entire planet. Two humanoid creatures stood on the Mount Everest. They looked like lizards, with thick tails, more than 3 meters tall, and stocky figures. It seems that they are of the same race as the lizard people of the Nash Kingdom and the Wulwan Empire. There are only some minor differences in appearance. One is completely white, while the other is as red as burning coals. That is a layer of armor-like skin that envelopes them. The red one was in front, and the white one was behind. The red lizard man had a dozen small antenna-like bumps on his head, and black grooves like tears next to his eyes. He crossed his arms, looked up at the peak in front of him, and exclaimed with a smile, "Is this the highest point of the world today? According to the usual methods of the Creator, I'm afraid there will be a new great flood soon." The white lizard man coldly scanned the frozen world below. When the ice and snow have melted away, the floodwaters will cover 80% of the land. At that time, only this land will remain. It will become the cradle that gives birth to a new generation of life. The red lizard man turned his back and said heroically, "It's decided. This place, we will occupy it. What do you think, Kuru?" The white lizard man named Kuru nodded and said, "Lord Kaz, your idea is very wise. We will be the new generation of angels and gain the favor of the Creator. At that time, we will be able to enjoy at least one whole era of peace. However, there are still many races on this planet that are hiding in the dark, waiting to compete for the position of angels." Kaz sneered, "For countless eons, the creatures that have been able to live on this planet have emerged from fierce battles. If anyone dares to block our path, then eliminate them." Kuru said, "The first thing we should get rid of is the current generation of humans. They have already been abandoned by the Creator. Without God's favor, even if we kill them all, the Creator will not punish us." Kaz turned around, narrowed his eyes, and coldly scanned the entire snowy plateau with his gaze. "You're right, we need to make room for the new generation." His head snapped to the side. "Isn't the native here already?" A sharp cry came from afar, and in the white sky, a golden sun quickly rose, and the shadow of a golden eagle appeared. Luozhua arrived in an instant, and came to the great snow mountain. He landed at the foot of Mount Everest. When he saw the two people who had suddenly appeared, there was not much surprise in his eyes, just a fleeting sense of the strange. After all, he had experienced the battle in Nash Kingdom and had personally gone to Tianhai City to face off against the Wulwan Empire. So he had long been familiar with the lizard demi-humans underground. He just didn't know where these two came from. Were there still people from Nash Kingdom who had not died, or were they creatures from some other new power? As the undertaker of the new Tantra, he embodied the faith of all the followers of the religion, and the two newcomers had made no effort to conceal their presence. So it was not long after their arrival that Luozhua noticed them. He clasped his hands together and bowed to Kaz and Kuru. "Where are you from, and what brings you to the snowy plateau?" Kaz and Kuru heard the device's translation in their ears, making them understand the human's words. However, after a glance at each other, both of them had a teasing smile in their eyes. "It seems to be one of the better guys in this generation. But that's about the limit." Kuru stepped forward and said to Kaz, "My lord, let me deal with this guy. Think of it as a hunt, it'll be fun, won't it?" Kaz had originally planned to take care of it himself. After all, it was quite interesting to encounter another intelligent species. But since his subordinates had asked, he shrugged and said, "As you wish. Just don't kill him too quickly and have some fun." Kuru nodded, "As you command, Lord Kaz." He stepped forward, not bothering to translate the language, and just smiled in his own race's language, saying, "Come on, you backward sixth-generation descendants. Let me see what level of evolution your generation has reached." He waved at Luoxua, and the meaning of this gesture must be the same among intelligent beings. Provocation. Luoxua looked at the two underground creatures in front of him and already understood that they were up to no good. His gaze became fierce. Unlike his brother Jugo, the shepherd's son had always been involved in the resistance army and did not have the forgiving nature of a Buddhist. Indeed, the visitor is not good. A burst of golden light suddenly erupted from Luoxua's body, and the wings on his back became even larger, like powerful weapons made up of golden feathers. In Kuru's eyes, he turned into a dazzling golden light and attacked as if the sun were tilting. Buddha's light surged from the top of the great snow mountain, illuminating all directions, and the overwhelming power swept in all directions in an instant. Kuru looked at the human in front of him and wore an arrogant smile on his face. It was the expression of a cat playing with a mouse, teasing a low-level creature. His smile was bright and brilliant, and it did not diminish until Luoxua arrived in front of him. Plop! Until his body fell onto the cold snow, the smile remained on his face. Kaz, who had been watching the show from the sidelines, suddenly changed expression. He had not expected such an outcome. In just one move, his right-hand man was killed by the human in front of him. Kuru paid the price for his arrogance. He was very strong and should not have been killed so easily. But he had underestimated Luoxua, who had unleashed his full power with just one move. Kuru's body fell to the ground, with a large hole in his chest. His internal organs spilled out and froze into an ink-green mass. His blood was green, like a worm. Luoxua's body came to a halt in the distance, surrounded by a golden glow. Golden wings unfurled behind him, like those of a giant condor. He himself had never expected such a good result from his attack. Indeed, it is different, he looked at his hands and muttered to himself. Only he could see that from the entire snowy plateau, streams of golden light converged on him. Boom! Luoxua did not have time to exclaim at the power at this moment, because on Mount Everest, a towering red wave of flames erupted. The death of his subordinates made Kaz furious. Not only was it because of the death of his subordinates, but also because he felt his authority had been offended. His scarlet body burned like a charcoal fire, and wisps of scarlet, blood-like flames rose, converging above him into a huge fireball. The searing heat instantly turned the 10,000-year-old ice on the summit of Mount Everest into snowmelt, which then evaporated into white mist. Even Luoxua felt his heart pounding with fear at the searing heat. It was clear that the red guy was much more powerful than the white guy. Damn aboriginal, how dare you kill my subordinate? I will finish you off in the most brutal way. And then I will kill all your people on this land. Kaz roared, his hands holding high the huge red sun, which had already reached a diameter of 100 meters. He hurled it in the direction of Luoxua. The red sun descended at great speed, and wherever it passed, all the ice and snow melted. Luoxua was not in the habit of wearing a battle suit, and although his supernatural powers protected his body, they could not completely block such intense heat. He felt his skin become scorching hot. However, he did not flinch, because if he did, once this red sun fell into the snowy region, it would bring about a huge catastrophe. The golden feathers on Luoxua's back unfurled one after the other. Whoosh! 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 The golden feathers, like 100,000 sharp blades, instantly broke off from the wings and shot forward. The golden feathers shot into the sky towards the red sun, slowing its movement, but most of them quickly melted away. Kaz stood on Mount Everest, controlling the red sun from afar as it pressed in. Feel the flames from the center of the earth. The speed of the red sun was slowed by the golden wings, but it still pushed forward with determination. This move was not flashy at all, but a complete display of overwhelming power. Luoxua had been blessed with the power of faith, but in the face of the absolute power difference between the two, he was still being pushed back. He felt as if his body was about to burst into flames, and his skin had turned a bright red. If there was a thermometer that could be inserted into his veins, his blood would probably be boiling. At this moment, in the distance, another golden light approached like lightning. Luoxua gritted his teeth, but his eyes lit up. "What took you so long?" The person who arrived was dressed in a simple red monk's robe, but his face was exactly the same as Luoxua's. It was his brother, Zhugo. Zhugo smiled slightly, without replying, and just charged towards Luoxua. The two golden lights merged into one, the two twin brothers becoming one. At this moment, he was no longer Zhugo or Luoxua, but the guardian god Undertaker that Tantra had inherited for countless ages. The moment the two merged, a terrifying power exploded from his body. The Undertaker extended his powerful hand and pushed forward, and a vast golden energy erupted like an ocean, colliding fiercely with the red sun. The red sun trembled in the sky, and its forward motion was forcibly restrained. Kaz couldn't believe what he was seeing. Why does such power belong to a lowly being? Could it be? His eyes wandered for a moment, as if he had thought of something. But now that things had come to this, there was no way he was leaving. To flee? That would be a total loss of face. As a member of the royal family of the Stone Rock clan, he could not accept defeat and flee. What's more, in this chaotic end of the world, he wanted to lead his own clan and compete. The snowy plateau was the territory of his dreams. You should be the strongest beings here, right? As long as we get rid of you two, this place will be ours. He was no stranger to the existence of guardians, his own race also had such beings. However, he believed that as a member of a higher race, he could defeat them. Rumble. In the sky, the huge red sun suddenly cracked open, and broken pieces of flame fell to the ground like meteors. Hundreds of huge lakes were created directly on the snowy plateau, with white water vapor billowing and the lake water boiling. A shrill screech came from Kaz's mouth, and his body instantly swelled up. His body, which was originally more than 3 meters tall, had suddenly grown more than 1 meter taller. His body was expanding as if it were being inflated, and his limbs had become a circle thicker. His skin, like the rocks of a volcano, was red, and scorching waves of heat escaped from the gaps in his skin. Mount Everest was melting, revealing the rocks that had covered it for many years, and even many fossils of marine creatures were peeled off. Many herdsmen in the nearby snowy plateau saw this miraculous scene. Mount Everest, which had always been covered in ice and snow, and was as white as jade, was now revealed as if it had taken off its clothes. They hurriedly knelt down and prayed piously. Boom! Kaz rushed towards the Undertaker like a bullet. His body was burning with an endless flame, like a scarlet sun, melting and burning everything in its path. The Undertaker looked at him with calm eyes, as if he felt neither joy nor sorrow. Only in the deepest part of his eyes did he carry a murderous intent that had been shattered. The Buddha also has the Dharma of raging Vajra, and he can be compassionate towards his enemies. But the person in front of him was not an enemy, but a creature that wanted to destroy all of humanity. There was no need to hold back. Undertaker did not flinch and charged head-on. A golden glow surrounded him. He was only about half the size of Kaz, and his smaller fist collided with the huge red fist. The energies of gold and red annihilated each other, and the fierce shockwave swept in all directions. Rumble. The ice on Mount Everest began to collapse on a large scale, causing a huge avalanche. The monks on the snowy plateau heard the commotion and hurriedly came out of the temple. As a result, they looked up and saw the summit of Mount Everest being blown to pieces. Buddha bless us. They were panic-stricken and could only bow their heads and pray piously, reciting sutras. They hoped that Buddha would protect them from suffering. Deep down, they had a precise image of the object of their prayers, Undertaker, the guardian deity of the Tantra faith on the snowy plateau. The power of the telekinesis of each individual is incredibly weak, so weak that it is almost undetectable. But unwavering faith, like a trickle of water that becomes a river, can become an unstoppable force. The power of the brothers Luoxua and Zhugo is not considered strong. Zhugo is a 22,000-point black chariot, and Luoxua is only at 18,000 points even now. Even after combining, the combat power they can unleash is still a long way from the level of the bishop. However, they do have a religion with a long history, and the power of the faith of millions of devout believers to bless them. This punch combines the faith of millions of people. Crack! A crisp, cracking sound came from Kaz's hand bone. The moment the blood flowed out, it was instantly vaporized. His body flew backward like a cannonball, finally coming to a stop after crashing hard against Mount Everest. The Undertaker's body wasn't much better off. His entire right arm was twisted, the bones were broken, and the arm was swollen. However, after a moment, the physical injuries were repaired. He was as intact as the majestic Buddha, and there was no sign of any problems. Zhuge and Luozhua could not help but exclaim in their hearts that it was fortunate that they had listened to Zhang Yi's advice and rebuilt the temple, recreating the Buddha's golden body and reuniting the power of the Tantric faith. Otherwise, facing an opponent of this level today, they would have been dead men. The two of them had no time to rest, because the next moment, they heard an ear-splitting sound. The top of Mount Everest, the world's highest mountain, had been cut in half. Rumble! The huge mountain was being held aloft by Kazuto, a scene that was extremely shocking, like an ant trying to shake a tree or a mole trying to move a mountain. Kaz held up the huge mountain, which was ablaze with flames, and then slammed it down on Undertaker. This was probably the biggest weapon in the world. Seeing this, the Undertaker hesitated for a moment, but was unable to avoid it. Because according to this posture, if he avoided it, the boulder would fall into Sarah City. By then, the mountain would explode like a bullet, killing countless people. The Undertaker muttered the Buddha's name in his mouth, Amitabha. His gaze was firm, and he finally decided to act to stop it. His right hand plucked a piece of flesh from the palm of his left hand. His blood flowed out, golden in color. His left hand pressed against his head, and the blood quickly flowed down his skull, dyeing his entire body a golden color. After a moment, he had become a golden Buddha statue. The image of Vajra, the indestructible golden body. Undertaker opened his eyes wide, already the raging Vajra. He charged forward and used his hands to embrace the enormous mountain. His body was thrown backwards by the tremendous impact, and Kaz took the opportunity to leap at him and take his life. But the Undertaker shouted out a Buddhist mantra, and his body suddenly released its strength, causing the mountain to crumble directly into pieces that splattered all over the Great Snow Mountain. He soared into the sky and engaged Kaz in a close combat. Zhuge's close combat skills were not high, but Luozhua, who was from the resistance army, was an expert. The two brothers combined forces, complementing each other and making up for each other's shortcomings, and their combat effectiveness was extremely strong. Seeing this, Kaz, who considered himself to be of the superior race, of course would not tolerate it. On the Great Snow Mountain, the two began to fight in the most primitive way. Fists, elbows, and knees, they didn't waste anything they could use. As they fought, they even began to wrestle like two ruffians, and both of them tumbled down the Great Snow Mountain. Boom! 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 The Great Snow Mountain had suffered today. Even when Zhang Yi had fought against Emperor Indra here before, it had not been damaged so badly. Today, Undertaker and Kaz had stood directly on the mountain and used their most powerful strength and most primitive methods to attack and kill. This power has dissipated all over the Great Snow Mountain. The falling snow on the mountain has been emptied, and a large number of pits have been created. If it weren't for the fact that this sacred mountain on the snowy plateau is large enough, it would have long since been reduced to flat land. Kaz's strength is indeed formidable. His body is as hard as rock, and his power is as fearsome as a dragon and an elephant. However, in the battle with the Undertaker, he went from initially having a slight advantage to quickly being on equal footing, and in the end, he even fell behind. He gradually realized that something was wrong, because in this land, no matter how badly the Undertaker was injured, he would be healed quickly. At first, Kaz didn't believe it, and he made a desperate attack, turning his right hand into a hand sword and directly piercing the Undertaker's heart, crushing his heart. This is a fatal injury for humans. But even so, the Undertaker did not die. This scene defied the laws of nature, and it was then that Kaz finally realized the terrifying power of tantric faith. But it was already too late. The Undertaker, like a perpetual motion machine, finally gained the upper hand after fighting for a day and a night. He ground Kaz to death and took off his head, which was now looking rather unassuming. It was only then that Jugo and Luoju's bodies parted, and a visible look of exhaustion appeared in their eyes. Not just them, but the followers of Tantra did not dare to rest after this battle was not over. And a heavy sense of exhaustion also appeared on their faces. They had obviously done nothing, but they felt as if they had been exhausted for a whole day, and felt that their energy and spirit had been greatly depleted. His strength is very strong, even more powerful than the King of Nash in the beginning. Luoju held the head of Kaz and unceremoniously absorbed his origin. Jugo also collected Kuru's corpse and absorbed his share of the origin. Troublesome times. Jugo looked into the distance. His tone was not relaxed despite the victory, but rather carried a hint of sadness. This world is becoming more and more chaotic. Because celestial execution did not appear. Did this mean that the Creator's restrictions on underground creatures had begun to be lifted on a large scale? Although the two of them did not know what would happen in the future, they still reported the matter to everyone on the 6 major regions' high-level communication channel. Time passed, and the entire country once again entered a state of panic. In the northwest region, Li Changgong sat in his warm office and, upon seeing the message from Luoju, felt his head start to ache. Damn it,